What if your closest ancestors ate your grandparents? That's a shocking question, but one that forces us to confront buried truths about the human journey. For tens of thousands of years, early modern humans, Cro-Magnon, lived alongside Neanderthals. They were giants, hunters, artists, survivors. But did they also cannibalize, and perhaps even kill, some of those very Neanderthals? What really led to Neanderthals vanishing, and what darker stories lie in the bones? Picture Europe, around 50,000 years ago, ice, predators, a world where survival demanded brute strength, sharp tools, and cunning. Into this harsh backdrop walked Cro-Magnon, our ancestors, muscular, tall, with brains as large or larger than ours in volume. They had tools, they had art, they had culture, and importantly, they had neighbors, the Neanderthals. These two kinds of humans, one extinct, one ancestral, shared land, competed for resources, perhaps even fought. That tension is the open loop we'll follow. Were these interactions peaceful, coexistence, competition, conflict, or something darker? When you picture the Cro-Magnon, don't imagine frail ancestors huddled in caves. These were giants by prehistoric standards, men often standing 6'2", even 6'3", their frames broad, their bones dense, their shoulders built like fortresses. They weren't just living through the Ice Age, they were enduring it, bodies forged to meet climates that froze the weak and hunts that tested the strong. But life was no easy triumph. Their skeletons whisper of brutality, broken ribs that healed crooked, fused vertebrae locking spines in pain, scars of infection etched into bone. They carried wounds that would have killed many of us today. And yet, somehow, they kept going. Survival wasn't gentle. It was earned day after day, until age, rarely beyond 40, claimed them. And still they hunted the monsters of their world. Mammoths towering above them, wild bison charging with deadly force, ox-like beasts bristling with danger. Armed with stone-tipped spears, heavy clubs, sharpened bone, and maybe even the first primitive ranged weapons, they stood face to face with giants, because they were giants themselves. For tens of thousands of years, Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons walked the same valleys, drank from the same rivers, and hunted the same prey. At sites like Grotte 16 in southwestern France, the bones tell a story. Reindeer, wild horses, great hoofed beasts, brought down by both species. Their diets overlapped almost perfectly, a mirror of survival strategies in a harsh Ice Age world. But survival is never static. As the climate shifted, the balance began to tilt. Cro-Magnon groups spread quickly, their numbers swelling, their camps multiplying. The old hunting grounds of the Neanderthals slowly became crowded, overrun by competitors who looked unsettlingly familiar, yet thought and organized differently. Some scholars, like Ofer Bar Yosef, argue that this edge was not sheer strength, but innovation. Sharper tools, stronger networks,
we must work together, hunters.
The ability to pass knowledge across distance and time. Cro-Magnons carried not just spears, but systems, social bonds, shared strategies, a kind of communication that stretched further than the hunt. For the Neanderthals, it may have been death by 1,000 small cuts, fewer resources, more competition, shrinking ground. Not a sudden extinction, but a slow eclipse, until the last fires of their kind went out. If the Ice Age was a test of survival, it was not always passed with honor. In the dark recesses of Gough's Cave in England, archaeologists uncovered something chilling. Human skulls reshaped into cups, bones cracked open for marrow, flesh stripped as if from an animal carcass. Some of the victims were young. Here, humanity crossed a line, turning its own kind into both sustenance and symbol. At Moulaghercy in France, Neanderthal bones bear the same grim evidence: cut marks on ribs and limbs, signs of deliberate butchery. Scholars debate the intent. Was it hunger in desperate times, or something older, darker, a ritual act that gave meaning to violence? Even among Neanderthals themselves, sites like El Cidrón in Spain reveal similar marks, bones processed as though the dead were prey. It forces us to confront a truth. Survival was not only about hunting mammoths or enduring the cold. Sometimes the enemy and the resource was each other. These shadows of blood and ritual still echo, hinting that the path to our survival was paved with acts we rarely dare to imagine. Cro-Magnons were not only hunters with powerful arms and sturdy bones. They were architects of thought, creators of culture, and innovators whose minds reshaped the world around them. Across Ice Age Europe, their presence can be traced through the rise of multiple cultures: the Aurignacian, Gravettian, Solutrean, Epigravettian, Magdalenian. Each left its own fingerprint of ingenuity, finely crafted tools, complex social systems, and art that still whispers from cave walls. Their diets reveal the same intelligence. They were not merely carnivores chasing meat. They gathered seeds, nuts, fruits, and roots, building a diverse diet that sustained both body and brain. They raised shelters against the wind, carved jewelry painted in ochre and charcoal. These were not brute survivors. They were symbolic beings, shaping identity, meaning, and memory. Genetics deepens the story. Modern people outside Africa still carry Neanderthal DNA, small echoes of encounters long ago. Some ancient individuals bore as much as 6 to 9% Neanderthal ancestry. Yet no Neanderthal maternal line survives in us. Their mitochondria vanished, even as fragments of their bloodline endured. It is here, in thought and culture, that Cro-Magnons define survival, not only with muscle, but with memory, imagination, and legacy. So we return to the unsettling question that began this journey. What really happened between Cro-Magnons and Neanderthals? Did one species slaughter the other? Did they merge? Did they consume each other in the most literal sense? The evidence whispers a complicated truth. Genetics shows us that Neanderthals were not entirely erased. Fragments of their DNA still live in us today. A trace of absorption, a memory of interbreeding, bloodlines entwined even as their population faded into silence. But bones tell a harsher story. At sites across Europe, we find trauma etched into skulls, butcher marks carved into human limbs, marrow cracked open like a resource. Not every encounter ended in violence, yet the record proves some did. Sometimes in hunger, sometimes in ritual, sometimes as an act of symbolic power. And beyond strength, Cro-Magnons wielded something sharper: culture. Tools that adapted, networks that expanded, diets that flexed with the seasons. These were advantages Neanderthals could not match under a shifting climate. There was no single cause, no neat answer. Climate stress, competition, disease, absorption, and violence all formed a web that ended Neanderthals. But the darkest thread, the idea that we ate them, is one we cannot fully close. Because in some caves, in some bones, the evidence is written too clearly to ignore. What do these revelations about Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons really mean for us, here and now? They remind us that humanity's story is not a clean arc of progress. It is tangled, complex, and morally shadowed. Our ancestors were not just inventors of art and beauty, but also capable of violence that chills us even today. They could paint delicate figures by firelight, and in the same breath, strip flesh from their own kind. Survival in the Ice Age demanded both extremes. It meant crossing lines we would recoil from now, and yet it also meant acts of creativity, of compassion, of cooperation. That contradiction is what makes us human, and in the caves and in our DNA the echoes remain. A fragment of Neanderthal in our blood, a handprint on stone walls, a broken bone bearing cut marks. Together they tell us that the human journey was never about one path, but about many. Conflict and coexistence, destruction and creation, absorption and survival. The shadows we inherited are not just theirs, they are ours. If you've made it this far, you're carrying something powerful. Memories of a time when survival meant something completely different. I invite you to linger a while in this shadow. What would it have been like to be a Cro-Magnon, watching a Neanderthal kill a mammoth, or to be the Neanderthal seeing newcomers carve your bones? What legacies, mental and moral, do we inherit from both? If you want more of this, more stories from the caves, the bones, the fires, subscribe to Prehistoric Shadows. Share this with someone who ponders who we were, and let's keep telling the stories that light up what it means to be human.